Madison Brooks stepped onto the polished marble floor of Valmont & Comrades, the most exclusive jewelry boutique in Beverly Hills, her simple soft blue dress catching the afternoon light that filtered through the towering glass windows. She carried herself with effortless grace, not the stiff, rehearsed kind one might expect from the wealthy elite that usually flooded this store, but a natural, unaffected poise born of kindness and quiet strength. Her chestnut hair, pulled into a neat, low bun, gleamed under the delicate chandeliers, and her delicate gold earrings were the only hint of adornment she wore. There was nothing flashy about her. No designer logos, no clinking of diamonds with every movement, no entourage in tow. And yet she possessed a glow that drew the eye in a way glittering jewels never could. Madison was used to such places, but never let them change her. She valued substance over appearances, intention over image, and today she had come with a simple purpose: to find a special gift for an upcoming charity gala that she was quietly sponsoring without fanfare or name plaques. As she entered, the atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. The two sales associates at the main display counter exchanged a glance. The kind of glance practiced in places where judgments are swift and unspoken. Frank, the senior associate with his sharp suit and sharper smile, made no effort to mask his disinterest. His eyes swept over Madison's modest dress, her simple leather flats, the small gray wallet peeking from her understated tote, and within seconds he had decided she was not worth his time. Not a threat, not an opportunity. Just another dreamer who had wandered in off Rodeo Drive to gawk at the unattainable. He turned back to his colleague, muttering something inaudible but dismissive, and went back to polishing an already spotless glass case. Madison, oblivious or perhaps simply unwilling to be drawn into the silent sneers around her, moved quietly through the boutique. She paused in front of a display of rare vintage lockets, small, intricately crafted pieces that spoke of another era, an era where sentimentality outweighed spectacle. She studied them thoughtfully, her fingertips hovering just above the glass as if reaching back into a memory. For a moment, the noise of the boutique, the clicking heels, the whispered gossip, the soft clink of jewelry, faded, and there was only Madison and the quiet beauty of craftsmanship and meaning. The spell broke when a sudden, sharp voice cut through the air. "Miss, those items are by special appointment only," Frank said, stepping around the counter with a practiced expression of strained politeness. His smile was tight, almost theatrical. "I'm afraid we reserve them for serious clients." His words were not aggressive, but the underlying message was clear as crystal. You don't belong here. A few nearby customers, and I polished, perfumed, dressed to impress, cast sidelong glances at Madison, some amused, others simply indifferent. Madison turned her head slowly, meeting Frank's eyes with an expression so composed, so unaffected, that for a fleeting second he hesitated, thrown off balance by the quiet certainty in her gaze. She smiled, a small, polite smile without challenge or submission, and nodded, stepping aside to let another woman, draped in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and gold chains, take her place at the display. Madison's hands remained loosely folded before her. She made no protest, no scene, no sharp retort. She simply moved toward another case further down, her every step a study in self-possession. The boutique buzzed around her as if she were invisible. Salespeople rushed to flatter, better-dressed clients, to usher them toward private salons behind velvet ropes, offering champagne and endless praise. No one else paid Madison any attention. It was as if the softness of her presence, her refusal to demand space, made her somehow less real to them. A shadow among the glittering figures they deemed worthy of respect. Still, she moved with purpose, her eyes lingering on a set of delicate pearl earrings that reminded her of the ones her grandmother had worn every Sunday to church, no matter how hard the times. Madison thought about the women who would benefit from the upcoming gala's silent auction. Single mothers, retired teachers, nurses who had sacrificed so much for their communities and asked so little in return. She wanted her donation to mean something, not just in monetary value, but in sentiment. Something personal, something enduring. Frank noticed her again as she reached into her tote, and a sigh of impatience escaped him before he could contain it. She was taking too long, lingering too close to things she could never afford. He crossed the boutique with the slow, heavy steps of someone preparing to deliver bad news and, feigning regret, said, "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable browsing our accessories section by the entrance. We have some lovely costume pieces. More budget-friendly options." His tone was smooth but cutting, the condescension woven into every syllable. Madison looked up once more, her expression unreadable, and for a long moment she simply stood there, the muted colors of her dress blending with the pale marble beneath her feet. Then, without a word, she opened her wallet and drew out a slender, jet-black card. No embossed numbers, no flashy branding, only a discreet gold insignia in the corner. She placed it gently on the counter. Frank's face faltered. A beat passed, then another. A tiny frown appeared between his manicured brows as he reached hesitantly for the card, inserting it into the terminal with the mechanical precision of a man on autopilot. He did not yet realize that with one simple, silent gesture, the balance of power in the room had begun to shift, like the slow, inevitable tilt of a great ocean liner changing course unseen beneath the surface of the waves. For a few seconds after the card was inserted, nothing happened. Then the terminal emitted a low, prolonged beep that cut through the polished stillness of the boutique like a knife through silk. Frank frowned deeper, tapping the screen impatiently, then looked up, forcing a thin smile as if to assure Madison this was simply a technical hiccup, nothing more. But Madison remained still, serene, watching him with quiet patience. She had no need to rush. Around them, the hum of the boutique continued, though an attentive ear might have caught the subtle shift in energy, the way the nearby associates began casting curious glances in their direction, the way the background music seemed suddenly too loud, too intrusive. Frank tried to restart the transaction, but the terminal froze, the screen flashing a discreet but unmistakable message. VIP protocol initiated. Manual verification required. His breath caught in his throat. Across the room, Denise, the assistant manager, noticed the problem and hurried over, her sharp heels clicking against the marble. She leaned over Frank's shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she read the terminal screen. Her mouth tightened. Without a word, she pulled out her personal tablet, accessing the boutique's internal system to cross-check the alert. Within seconds, she stiffened, her complexion paling. She turned to Frank, her voice low but urgent. "That's a level 1 account holder," she whispered, glancing nervously at Madison, who remained composed, her hands loosely folded in front of her. "We need to contact Mr. Stanford immediately." Frank's heart sank. Mr. Stanford, the regional director of Valmont and Comward, did not tolerate mistakes, and certainly not when it involved a level 1 client. Frank swallowed hard, feeling the beads of sweat beginning to gather at the back of his neck. Denise shot him a withering look before stepping back and hastily pulling out her phone, her hands trembling slightly as she dialed. Madison said nothing throughout the exchange, her face an unreadable mask of calm. She could feel the shift in the air, the slow, reluctant recognition dawning around her, but she neither smirked nor gloated. She stood as she had stood when she entered, patient, self-contained, unshakable. Other customers, sensing that something unusual was happening, began to look over with growing interest. A woman in a silk pantsuit whispered to her friend, glancing sideways at Madison, their curious eyes flitting between the frozen terminal and the stiff postures of the staff. Even the junior associates at the far end of the boutique stopped pretending to reorganize the scarves and watches, their attention drawn like iron filings to a magnet. Something was happening, something they did not understand but instinctively knew was important. Meanwhile, Denise's conversation with Mr. Stanford grew increasingly tense. She murmured phrases like verification locked system-wide, and client-flagged priority access, and in-person authorization recommended. Madison could hear snippets, though she made no effort to appear interested. She did not need to hear every word to know what was unfolding. She had seen it before, in other stores, in other places where worth was measured not by the kindness of your spirit, but by the sparkle of your clothes and the thickness of your wallet. After a terse exchange, Denise ended the call, her face flushed. She approached Madison with a forced smile so brittle it seemed it might crack with the slightest breeze. "Ms. Brooks," she began, voice trembling slightly, "it seems there has been a minor issue with our system recognizing your account. If you would kindly follow me to our private lounge, we would be honored to assist you there, in greater comfort." Her tone was syrupy, overly sweet, the kind used to cover panic and shame. She gestured toward a velvet-draped hallway leading to a series of private salons reserved for celebrities and VIP clients. Salons Madison had no need or intention to use. Madison's eyes remained steady on Denise, reading every flicker of anxiety behind her polished facade. For a moment, she said nothing, simply allowing the invitation to hang between them, exposing its desperation. Then, in a voice soft but firm, she replied, "No, thank you. I'm comfortable here." She did not raise her voice. She did not threaten. But the refusal carried a weight that seemed to press the very air flat around them. Denise faltered, opening and closing her mouth like a fish gasping for breath. Around them, the murmuring of the other clients grew louder. No longer was Madison invisible. Now she was the center of a drama none of them fully understood, but all were eager to witness. Frank, still standing awkwardly by the terminal, shifted from foot to foot, his face a mask of forced politeness and barely veiled dread. He cleared his throat and tried once more, desperation creeping into his voice. "Perhaps, Ms. Brooks, if you allow me to personally assist you in selecting a few pieces," he began, but Madison gently cut him off. "I know what I want," she said quietly, turning her gaze back to the display of vintage lockets. "It's right here." Her fingers lightly brushed the glass above a delicate piece. A small oval locket with intricate filigree work, no larger than a thumbnail, its surface worn smooth by time and love. A modest piece compared to the grandiose diamond necklaces and ruby tiaras displayed around it, but infinitely more precious to someone who understood its language. Frank hesitated, then nodded stiffly, motioning for a junior clerk to fetch the locket. The young woman, barely out of college judging by the nervous eagerness in her movements, obeyed quickly, her hands trembling slightly as she retrieved the piece and laid it reverently on a velvet pad before Madison. Madison examined the locket carefully, her touch feather-light, almost reverent. She smiled, a real smile this time, soft and genuine. A smile that made the cold, polished walls of the boutique seem, for a moment, a little less sterile. "I'll take it," she said, lifting her eyes to meet Frank's once more. He nodded jerkily, signaling to process the sale manually. But when he tried to initiate the transaction, the system again locked him out, demanding executive authorization. This time, Madison spoke before anyone could scramble to fix it. "It's all right," she said, her voice as calm as a mountain lake. "I don't need the item right now. I simply wanted to know if anyone would see me beyond the clothes I wear." She slipped her card back into her wallet and, without waiting for an answer, turned and walked slowly toward the boutique's entrance, the faint click of her low heels echoing behind her. The boutique seemed to hold its collective breath as she moved, parting the air like a ship through still waters. No grand declarations, no shouting, no accusations. Only a silence heavier than any words, filled with the unspoken shame of those who had judged and failed. Denise stood frozen in place, the corners of her mouth twitching as she fought between protocol and mortification. Frank stared at the useless terminal, as if willing it to erase the past 5 minutes. At the threshold, Madison paused, letting her hand rest briefly on the glass door. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes sweeping the boutique one final time. Not with anger, not with triumph, but with a deep, quiet sorrow that struck more painfully than any shouted reproach. Then she stepped out into the golden sunlight, her silhouette framed by the brilliance of the day, leaving behind her a store full of people who had finally begun to see what they had missed, and the aching knowledge that it was far too late to make it right. Madison's figure disappeared into the warm afternoon light beyond the boutique's glass doors, but the disturbance she left behind lingered like a charge in the air. Inside Valmont and Commoinen, the atmosphere had shifted in a way that could not be undone. Frank stood stiffly behind the counter, his palms slick with sweat, heart pounding beneath his tailored vest as he struggled to comprehend the full scope of the disaster he had just orchestrated. Denise barked short, frantic instructions at the junior associates to resume normal operations, but the energy of the boutique refused to settle. Customers whispered behind manicured hands, some quietly retreating toward the exit, others pretending to continue shopping but casting frequent glances toward the shaken staff. The boutique, usually a haven of cold elegance and effortless superiority, now vibrated with an invisible, grinding tension that no amount of curated sophistication could cover. As Frank wiped his hands discreetly against his slacks, the boutique's main phone line began to ring, sharp and insistent. Denise snatched it up with trembling fingers, her voice tight and brittle as she answered. Within moments, her complexion paled visibly. She mumbled a string of affirmatives and apologies before hanging up and looking directly at Frank, her expression stricken with something close to terror. That was Mr. Stanford's office, she said in a low voice, barely managing to keep it steady. They're sending a representative immediately. Today. We've been flagged for an internal compliance audit. Frank's stomach twisted into a hard, painful knot. An audit at Valmont and Coyers was no minor event. It was a public humiliation, a career-ending mark that could follow him through the highest tiers of luxury retail. In one catastrophic hour, his world had narrowed from the glittering promise of advancement to the suffocating panic of survival. Meanwhile, Madison did not immediately disappear into the anonymity of Beverly Hills' busy streets. Instead, she crossed the sunlit plaza to a small shaded bench beneath an old oak tree, its thick branches spreading a dappled pattern of gold and green across the stone pavement. She sat down slowly, folding her hands in her lap, her posture still, her breathing calm. From her vantage point, she could still see the boutique's entrance. People flowed in and out, stylish, indifferent, chattering, unaware of the silent tremors running through the building. Madison was not waiting out of anger or resentment. She was simply allowing the full weight of the moment to land where it was meant to land, on those who had thoughtlessly cast her aside. Back inside, the boutique's front doors opened with a soft chime, and a man in an immaculate navy suit entered with purposeful steps. His presence was immediately felt. He moved like someone used to commanding a room without needing to raise his voice. This was Anthony Gray, personal liaison to the board of Valmont and Coyers, a man whose very appearance in a branch store typically heralded either major acquisitions or major trouble. Denise rushed forward to greet him, smoothing her hair with a trembling hand, while Frank hung back, feeling like a schoolboy awaiting punishment. Gray's sharp eyes swept the boutique once, noting everything. The tense staff, the anxious customers, the incomplete transactions blinking on frozen terminals. Without a word, he gestured for Denise to follow him to the private conference room at the rear of the boutique. Frank was summoned with a curt flick of the wrist, and he obeyed, his legs wooden with dread. The private conference room, usually reserved for celebrity clients and foreign dignitaries, now served as an impromptu courtroom. Gray closed the door softly behind them and turned to face Frank and Denise with a calmness that was somehow more terrifying than any explosion of anger. "Explain," he said simply. And Denise launched into a stumbling account of the past hour, coloring her words carefully, attempting to minimize Frank's behavior without lying outright. But Gray's expression remained unreadable, his eyes narrowing slightly at key points. At the mention of the black card, at the activation of the VIP protocol, at Madison's quiet departure. When Denise finished, Gray let the silence stretch long enough to become uncomfortable. Then he spoke, his voice low and precise. "Do you understand who you just insulted?" he asked, his tone almost conversational, but the muscles in his jaw were tight. "Ms. Brooks is not merely a valued client. She is a silent investor in the parent company that holds a significant interest in Valmont and Co. Without her funding, several of our international expansion projects would not exist." Frank felt the blood drain from his face, his hands clenching and unclenching uselessly at his sides. Denise opened her mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it. Gray continued, his voice now slicing through the room with surgical precision. "More importantly, Ms. Brooks embodies the values that Valmont claims to stand for. Heritage, discretion, authenticity. And you," he said, fixing Frank with a cold stare, "treated her like a nuisance. You judged her by the superficial markers we pretend to disdain in our marketing materials while enforcing them in practice. You failed her, and by extension, you failed this entire brand." Frank's head hung low, a cold sweat prickling across his scalp. His career at Valmont was over. He knew it even before Gray's next words made it official. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending review. Turn in your credentials and leave the premises." Denise, too, was not spared. Though she was not dismissed outright, Gray made it clear her future at Valmont would be determined after a full compliance review. Her face crumpled slightly at the edges, but she nodded stiffly, accepting her fate with the grim professionalism of someone who had seen careers destroyed for less. As Gray concluded the meeting, he turned his attention back to the boutique as a whole. "We will issue a formal apology to Ms. Brooks," he said, "and you will instruct the entire staff to attend mandatory re-education seminars on client relations and brand values." His tone left no room for discussion. He opened the conference room door, and with that, the meeting was over. Frank shuffled out first, his mind numb, his body moving on autopilot. Denise followed more slowly, her shoulders rigid with suppressed emotion. Gray remained a moment longer, surveying the boutique floor like a general assessing a battlefield after a crushing defeat. Then, with a slight nod to himself, he stepped into the sunlight and was gone. From across the plaza, Madison watched him leave. She could have smiled then, or felt vindicated, but instead she only sighed softly, standing up from her bench and brushing invisible dust from her dress. She had not sought revenge. She had sought only to be seen as she truly was, a human being worthy of basic decency. That so much chaos had followed was not her doing, but rather the natural consequence of a system built on superficial judgments. With unhurried grace, she turned away from the boutique and began walking down the avenue, blending into the bustling crowd with the same quiet dignity she had carried into Valmont and Courtney that afternoon. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the pavement, and somewhere nearby, a street musician played a soft, hopeful tune that drifted through the air like a promise of something better yet to come. The late afternoon sun dipped lower, casting a honeyed glow over Beverly Hills as Madison moved away from the boutique, her figure blending into the languid, easy movement of the sidewalk crowds. Yet inside her chest, a quiet weight remained. Not of anger nor of triumph, but of something more complex. A bittersweet sadness, the kind that settles deep in the heart when you realize that even in the places adorned with the world's finest things, the truest treasures are often the most invisible. She wandered without aim for a while, letting her steps be guided not by destination but by instinct. The soft rhythm of her heels tapping against the stone and concrete in a kind of thoughtful counterpoint to the murmured conversations and occasional laughter drifting from nearby cafes and boutiques. Madison was not unfamiliar with the loneliness, though it had never been the kind that came from the absence of company. It was the loneliness of understanding, of seeing how easily kindness could be abandoned in favor of shallow judgments and surface impressions. She passed by a flower stall, the bright fragrance of gardenias and jasmine rising into the warm air, and paused, her hand hovering over a small bouquet of wildflowers, their vibrant, imperfect beauty stirring a memory she had not touched in years. Her grandmother's voice echoed faintly in her mind. "The rarest blossoms aren't the ones in the grand gardens, Maddie. They're the ones that grow where no one thought to look." For a moment, the sting of the earlier humiliation softened, replaced by a deeper, more enduring truth. She selected the bouquet, paid with a quiet smile, and resumed her walk, the fragile stems cradled gently in her arm like a promise. Meanwhile, back at Valmont and Kozer, the wheels of bureaucracy had already begun to turn. A flurry of emails circulated between corporate offices. Damage control strategies were discussed, apologies drafted, reputations recalculated with clinical efficiency. Denise, now relegated to the back office, watched the frenzy unfold with a hollow numbness, understanding with painful clarity that no memo, no seminar, no public relations campaign could truly erase the moment when the boutique had failed to recognize simple human worth. It was a failure written not in policies but in hearts, and it would take more than apologies to mend it. In the midst of this corporate maelstrom, the junior associate who had earlier handed Madison the locket, a shy young woman named Claire, sat frozen at her station, the weight of the day's events settling heavily on her narrow shoulders. Unlike the others, Claire had not sneered, had not laughed, had not judged. She had simply obeyed, too timid to challenge the unspoken hierarchy that ruled the boutique floor. Now, as she watched the cascading consequences unfold, she wondered whether silence could ever be innocent. Claire remembered the look in Madison's eyes, calm, steady, unfathomably kind, and felt a pang of something that went beyond guilt, something closer to awakening. Elsewhere, Madison finally found herself before the doors of a modest, nondescript building nestled between two sprawling designer shops. There was no velvet rope, no gold-plated sign, only a simple wooden plaque that read, "The Haven, Community Center for Women and Families." She smiled softly to herself. It had not been a coincidence that had brought her here today. In her tote bag, besides her wallet and phone, rested a small folder containing donation papers for a new program she had quietly helped fund. A program offering education, shelter, and support for women starting over, women who had faced the crushing indifference of the world and chosen to rebuild anyway. Stepping inside, Madison was greeted not by marble floors or crystal chandeliers, but by the warm laughter of children, the smell of fresh paint, and the gentle hum of lives being slowly, patiently mended. She walked through the modest halls, nodding to the volunteers and staff who knew her not as an heiress, not as an investor, but simply as Madison, one of their own, a friend and supporter. Here, no one cared about the label on her dress or the weight of the card in her wallet. Here, she was valued for the quiet hours spent tutoring, for the late-night phone calls answering fears, for the hundreds of small, unseen acts that stitch the fabric of real community. A group of young women sat at a long table by the window assembling care packages. One of them, a girl no older than 20, looked up and waved shyly. Madison waved back, her heart lifting at the sight. In this small, imperfect place, amid second-hand furniture and scuffed linoleum floors, she found a richness that the grandest boutiques could never offer. Here, worth was measured in courage and kindness, not couture and pedigree. As she moved to join them, her phone buzzed quietly in her bag. She hesitated, then answered. It was Anthony Gray. His voice was formal, but there was an undercurrent of genuine contrition Madison had not expected. He informed her with careful deference that Valmont and Cower had suspended the responsible parties and would be implementing sweeping internal reforms. He offered humbly a personal apology on behalf of the company's leadership and an invitation to a private meeting should she wish to discuss any further amends. Madison listened without interruption, her gaze drifting to the girls at the table, the sunlight threading through their hair like a benediction. When Gray finished, Madison's reply was gentle but firm. "Thank you," she said, "but I have no interest in apologies spoken behind closed doors. If Valmont wishes to show sincerity, let them begin by treating every client and every person you meet with dignity, not just the ones who can retaliate." There was a long pause on the line. Then Gray said quietly, "Understood." Madison ended the call and slipped the phone back into her bag, turning her full attention once more to the life blooming before her, messy and imperfect and achingly beautiful. She knew the road ahead, for Valmont, for herself, for the world, would not be easy. Change never was, but as she bent down to help tie a ribbon around a care package destined for a woman who had lost everything but her hope, she also knew it was possible. The wildflowers in her arm shifted slightly, their colors vivid against the simple fabric of her dress. No grand garden, no manicured rose, just life, stubborn and shining and real. Evening descended upon Beverly Hills like a velvet curtain, softening the sharp lines of the city's architecture, painting the bustling streets with long shadows and pools of golden light from the ornate lamps overhead. Madison left the community center with a heart lighter than when she had entered, though she was not naive enough to believe the events of the day were truly behind her. She had seen the first ripple. Now she would witness the full wave. As she made her way back toward the heart of the shopping district, her simple dress now kissed by the cooling breeze of dusk, a quiet certainty settled in her bones. There would be consequences that could not be contained by mere apologies or internal memos. The facade had cracked. Whether the structure itself would crumble remained to be seen. At Valmont & Koner, the boutique that had once been a pristine fortress of unattainable luxury, now stood battered, not physically, but in the fragile, invisible realm of reputation. Anthony Gray had returned, this time not merely to manage damage control, but to deliver a message from the highest echelons of ownership. The staff, gathered hastily in the main hall, shifted uneasily, their polished appearances now betraying a tension that not even perfect tailoring could disguise. Gray's entrance silenced the murmured speculation. His steps were deliberate, his expression impassive. But the weight he carried into the room was palpable, an invisible force that pressed down on every bowed head and twitching hand. Without preamble, he began to speak, his voice measured yet resonant enough to reach every corner of the boutique. "Today," he said, "we failed not only a client but a principal. We allowed prejudice to outweigh service, assumption to outweigh curiosity, vanity to outweigh humility. And for that, Valmont and Coerce will answer not only with words, but with deeds." He paused, letting the words hang heavy in the charged silence. Effective immediately, this location will close for a full week to undergo a comprehensive reorientation, not only in customer relations, but in values. Each of you will be required to complete an intensive program, not as a punishment, but as an opportunity to remember what service means, what respect means, what humanity means. There were audible gasps among the staff. A full closure? It was unheard of. Unthinkable. The boutique was a jewel in the company's crown. Closing it, even temporarily, would draw attention far beyond corporate circles. But Gray was not finished. He turned to Denise, who stood stiff and pale near the entrance, and to Frank, who hovered like a shadow at the periphery of the group. For those whose actions directly contributed to today's events, he continued, his tone sharpening like a scalpel, there will be no second chances. You will not return when we reopen. No anger laced his words. It was not needed. The stark finality of the statement was more devastating than any outburst could have been. Frank's knees buckled slightly, and Denise let out a small, broken sound she quickly smothered. Gray's gaze swept the room, pinning each staff member in place. You are not here to judge, he said quietly. You are not here to enforce your own hierarchies of worth. You are here to serve with dignity, to offer beauty without cruelty, to recognize in every soul that walks through those doors a potential story you have not yet heard. The words settled into the stunned silence, embedding themselves deeper than any corporate training manual ever could. Outside, Madison had paused at the corner opposite the boutique, her gaze falling naturally upon its grand facade, its towering windows now darkened by early evening shadows. She could not hear the speech unfolding inside, but she did not need to. She could feel the shift, the way one feels the first cool breeze before a coming storm, the unmistakable tremor of something rigid beginning, finally to bend. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from a friend on the Valmont board, a woman she had once mentored quietly, years ago when the world had still underestimated both of them. The message was brief but telling. Real change coming. Because of you. Madison allowed herself a small, fleeting smile. She had not set out to be a catalyst today. She had set out to find a simple gift, a token of remembrance and hope. That her small act of self-respect could spark a larger reckoning was not a triumph to celebrate, but a responsibility to carry carefully. Inside, Gray concluded the gathering with one final instruction. Tomorrow, he said, every member of the staff will accompany me to the Haven Community Center. There, you will volunteer. You will meet women who have been judged, dismissed, underestimated, and you will listen. Not to teach, not to fix, but to understand. A stunned silence met his words, but Gray did not soften them. If you cannot do that, he added, then you cannot wear the Valmont name. The staff dispersed slowly, like leaves scattered by a sudden gust. Some fled toward the back offices, seeking the hollow safety of tasks to shield themselves from reflection. Others lingered, numbed by the realization that their world had shifted on its axis. Frank left without looking back, his dreams of prestige collapsing inward like a dying star. Denise, for all her faults, remained rooted to the marble floor for a long moment, staring at nothing, before she too turned and walked away. Not with the brisk efficiency she had always worn like armor, but with the heavy, uncertain steps of someone forced to see herself clearly for the first time. As the boutique emptied, Madison turned away from the scene and continued down the street. The bouquet of wildflowers still rested lightly in the crook of her arm, their colors vivid even as night fully fell. She thought of the community center, of the young women tying ribbons and dreaming brave, stubborn dreams. She thought of the locket she had admired, a small, modest, enduring, and realized she no longer needed it. Its meaning was already alive inside her, stitched into every choice she made, every quiet act of defiance against a world too quick to judge and too slow to love. The stars began to emerge scattered across the velvet sky, and Madison walked on, a soft, steady light among them, unseen by most, unforgettable to those who truly looked. The next morning rose with a clarity that seemed almost symbolic. The air crisp, the light sharp and clean as if the world itself had decided to begin anew. Madison sat quietly by the window of a small cafe across from Valmont & Co., her hands wrapped around a cup of plain black coffee, watching as the staff of the boutique gathered outside, uncertain and subdued. The great glass doors that had once separated the worthy from the unworthy now stood open, not to wealthy clients, but to the wider world, the morning sun illuminating every marble tile, every polished brass fitting, as if exposing the place to a kind of moral audit far deeper than any corporate inspection could impose. Madison could have chosen not to be there, could have allowed the process to unfold without her presence, but there was something important about witnessing change, however imperfect or incomplete. Something about seeing the seeds you had planted, with silent courage, begin to break through the hardened soil. Across the street, Anthony Gray stood before the assembled employees, a clipboard in one hand, his tailored suit immaculate yet unassuming. His face was set in that same unreadable mask, but there was a new edge to his posture. Not anger, not superiority, but a quiet, implacable demand for accountability. The staff, clad now not in their designer uniforms but in simple jeans and t-shirts, shifted uneasily under his gaze, their confidence stripped away, leaving something rawer, more human beneath. Without ceremony, Gray divided them into teams and dispatched them toward the Haven Community Center. Their day of service about to begin, not with lectures or apologies, but with action. Real, messy, humbling action that no amount of training videos could substitute. Madison finished her coffee, set down her cup, and crossed the street. She moved without hurry, each step deliberate, not to intimidate, not to dominate, but to be present, fully and unmistakably. Some of the employees recognized her immediately. Others needed a beat longer, but recognition came all the same. Rippling through the group like a dropped stone disturbs the surface of a still pond. A hush fell, as if the city itself held its breath. Madison offered no speeches, no dramatic confrontations. She simply nodded once to Gray, who inclined his head in silent acknowledgement, and then turned her attention to the volunteers, speaking with a soft, clear voice that carried across the gathering without needing to rise. "You will be working with people today who have been judged their whole lives," she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "Judged by their clothes, by their jobs, by their circumstances. They will not ask you where you went to school or what you wear on your wrist. They will ask only if you see them, really see them. If you can do that, you will have already done more than most." Her words, simple and unadorned, struck harder than any scolding could have. There was a pause, then a few hesitant nods, then more. Madison gave a small smile, not of triumph, but of encouragement, and stepped aside, allowing the groups to move forward to begin the slow, necessary work of unlearning and relearning what it meant to serve, to respect, to be human. The day unfolded in small, almost invisible victories. Denise, once so sharp and brittle, spent an hour sitting on a worn carpet, listening to a woman describe her journey from homelessness to stability without once checking her phone or glancing at the clock. Claire, the junior associate, helped organize donated clothes with a gentleness that belied the nervousness she had first displayed, her face lighting up when a little girl shyly hugged her legs in thanks. Even Frank, who had expected to spend the day performing the minimum necessary to avoid further punishment, found himself humbled when a weathered man with kind eyes and a broken smile offered to teach him how to patch a jacket. A skill Frank had never learned, a dignity he had never thought to respect. Through it all, Madison remained in the background, not supervising, not directing, simply present, her hands working alongside the others, tying care packages, painting walls, sweeping floors. She was no different from anyone else there, and in that sameness lay a quiet, unassailable truth that needed no announcement. She had never wanted a stage. She wanted only the world to remember its own heart. As the afternoon waned into golden evening, the volunteers gathered one last time in the community center's modest courtyard, their clothes smudged, their hands sore, their faces reflecting an exhaustion that was physical but also strangely cleansing. Anthony Gray stood again before them, but this time his clipboard hung forgotten at his side. His voice when he spoke was different too, lower, less practiced, almost hesitant with something resembling genuine feeling. "Today was not enough to fix what went wrong," he said. "It will take more than one day, more than one apology to undo years of forgetting what service truly means. But it's a beginning, and beginnings matter." The group stood quietly, some nodding, some simply absorbing the weight of the day. Madison felt a warmth rise in her chest. Not the giddy satisfaction of revenge, but the deeper, steadier warmth of hope, fragile and stubborn and alive. As the group began to disperse, Claire approached her, clutching a small folded piece of paper. Her cheeks flushed, her hands trembling slightly, she pressed the note into Madison's palm without speaking and hurried away. Madison unfolded it slowly, finding written in neat, careful letters. "Thank you for seeing us when we didn't even know how to see ourselves." The edges of the paper blurred for a moment as tears pricked Madison's eyes, unbidden but welcome. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her pocket, where it would remain. A quiet reminder that even the smallest acts of dignity could ripple outward farther than she might ever see. The sun sank lower, gilding the city in a final blaze of color, and Madison turned her steps homeward, not with the victorious stride of the conqueror, but with the quiet, steady walk of someone who knew that real victories were seldom seen by. Crowds seldom celebrated with fanfare, but were no less real for their silence. She disappeared into the city's golden haze, a simple woman whose true wealth lay not in her wallet or her reputation, but in her unyielding, radiant humanity. A light the world so often forgot it needed, yet one it could not afford to lose. The days that followed passed without spectacle, without grand announcements or sweeping declarations, but change, real change, often moved in such invisible currents, reshaping the landscape quietly, one small shift at a time. Valmont and Comard reopened a week later not with a red carpet or champagne, but with a modest plaque by the door, small and simple, almost easy to miss unless you looked closely. It bore no corporate branding, no flourish of signatures, only a few words etched into the polished brass. Respect all who walk through these doors. There were no further press releases, no staged apologies on glossy social media feeds. Instead, there was a deliberate return to something older, something purer. A quiet, genuine attentiveness to every customer, whether adorned in diamonds or denim. Madison never sought to verify whether the change endured indefinitely. She did not need to. Her work had never been about surveillance or control. It had been about planting seeds in soil she might never see bloom, trusting that some would take root simply because they had been given the chance. She herself returned to her quiet routines, moving between the world of community centers and small charities with the same steady grace she always had, investing her time and her resources not into things that sparkled under chandeliers, but into things that grew in places few thought to tend. The locket she had admired remained at Valmont, a silent testament to a moment that had passed, a relic not of possession, but of choice. Madison no longer needed it because she had understood that some treasures, once claimed internally, need no physical emblem to validate their worth. One afternoon, weeks after that long, bruising day, she sat again at her favorite cafe, the city bustling around her in its endless, tireless rhythm. Across the plaza, the boutique gleamed under the sun, its windows catching the light without the same cold glare they once had. As she stirred her coffee absently, she noticed a young woman hesitating at the boutique's threshold. She was plainly dressed, her shoes slightly scuffed, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense braid. Uncertainty wavered in her posture, the kind Madison recognized instinctively. The hesitation of someone expecting to be dismissed before she had even spoken. For a moment, Madison tensed, old memories flickering through her mind. But then she saw it. A junior associate, new perhaps, stepping forward with an open, welcoming smile, offering the woman assistance without judgment, without calculation. The young woman smiled back, relief softening her features, and together they disappeared into the bright interior. Madison let out a slow breath she had not realized she was holding, feeling the tight coil of something in her chest. Not anger, not sadness, but cautious hope. Finally, gently unwind. She turned her gaze back to her coffee, the corners of her mouth lifting in a small, private smile. The world was still imperfect. There would always be those too proud to learn, too blinded by appearance to see. But today, for this moment, in this place, something had shifted, however subtly. And that was enough. Sometimes the greatest victories were not the ones that drew applause or headlines, but the ones that lived quietly in changed hearts, in unseen kindnesses, in choices made when no one else was watching. Madison gathered her things, slipping the latest dog-eared novel into her bag, and rose to leave. As she stepped into the sunlight, it caught on the delicate gold chain around her neck. A simple pendant, gifted by the women of the Haven Center, shaped not into a grand symbol, but into a tiny, imperfect heart. She wore it not as a badge of triumph, but as a quiet reminder that true worth was not measured by the eyes of others, but by the life one chose to live when no one was keeping score. The city moved around her, vibrant and chaotic, full of endless judgments and endless hopes. And Madison walked into it without fear, her head held high, her spirit anchored not in what she carried or what she wore, but in the unwavering, luminous dignity that no boutique, no card, no fleeting approval could ever grant or take away.